Joining me today is Bud Jackson, founder of Jackson Group Media and a principal at Aurora Strategy. Good to have you on, Bud.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here, Marcel. Good morning.
So a lot of things have been happening in Washington and the U.S. on the political scene. First of all, we had the FBI raid take place at Mar-a-Lago. A lot of people have been jumping up and down about that, both pro-Trump and pro-Democrats. What's your take on this?
Well, it's in the eye of the beholder right now. We're still waiting for more information, I think. A report just came out this morning from the Washington Post, and some of the materials that they were looking for were related to nuclear weapons, and that could mean anything. So, and Trump also said this morning that he was okay with releasing the actual warrant. So we need to learn more about this. But I think in general, it probably tilts back to beauty is in the eye of the beholder in terms of how this is going to impact the race. The Republicans are going to say this is riling up their base. It's getting people angry, and it's going to get them to go support Trump. Democrats on the other side my view is that the more the general electorate or general election voters focus on issues like this, the Republicans are talking about these sorts of issues rather than focusing on the economy, gas prices, et cetera, then it actually helps Democrats, because hopefully we are now in a lane where we're just going to focus in on things like that.
Well, it's been a pretty good week or two for President Biden. He scored a major victory in Congress, getting his bills passed that were logjammed for almost a year or so. How is that going to play out for Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections?
So let's talk about the midterm elections and historically and what we're looking at right now. On the agenda here in the U.S., all the House seats are in play, and then there are 35 seats in the Senate at play. Of the 35 seats in the Senate at play, 21 have to be defended by Republicans, 14 are being defended by Democrats. Control, obviously, there's an even 50-50 split in the Senate, so a one-seat flip to the Republicans gives them a majority and helps stymie anything the Biden administration wants to do for the next couple of years. So let's talk about control for the Senate first.
Sure.
I'm an optimist, and our best chances as a Democrat are in the Senate. Our best chances of securing a majority in the Senate, securing a majority in either of these houses, is going to be in the Senate, as opposed to the House, which is likely going to go Republican. But on the Senate side, Democrats are benefiting from a primary election where Donald Trump-backed incumbents did very well. And what does that mean for the general election? Donald Trump-backed candidates are some of the more extreme candidates in the Republican Party, and as a result.
Well, aren't these the same type of people who've been denying that the election was lost? They're the same people who support the January 6th insurrection?
Exactly. This is the more fringy side of the Republican Party. Again, I put air quotes on Republican Party because the Republican Party isn't what it used to be. It's not a conservative, sort of anti-tax conservative party. Now it's sort of a...
It's not the same party as the Bush administrations.
Oh, and when we're in the Bush administration, we're saying it wasn't the same as the Reagan, but this is basically an extreme fringe sliver of the Republican Party. It represents Donald Trump's, hardcore 33 to 35% of support. But going back to the point here, the fringe versus the Democratic candidates, Republicans had the option of nominating a more moderate, even that should be in air quotes, honestly, a more moderate version of a Republican candidate to take on the Democrat in November, but they chose not to because Trump is winning these, showing that he is still strong within the Republican Party in terms of his sway. But as a result, you've got, in some of these key battleground states, you actually have weaker Republican candidates against the Democrats.
Well, there were stories, sorry, Bud, but there were stories that Democrats were encouraging Democratic voters to vote in the primaries for some of these right-wing Republicans.
Yes, Democratic candidates, special interest groups made a obvious effort to support the fringe Republican candidates to try to help them to get nominated, because they knew they had a better chance in November of beating these people even against all the headwinds that face Democrats. And we've seen that play out to the Democrats' advantage in states like Pennsylvania, where we have Dr. Oz, a reality TV show doctor, now facing the Democratic nominee, which is helping Democrats there right now. They have a lead in Pennsylvania, which is one of the important swing states. You're seeing that in Georgia, where former NFL player Herschel Walker, who has been saying crazy things, has been nominated for the Republicans. So a weaker Republican opponent in many of these important, crucial states are bolstering Democratic chances for at least hanging on to the majority of the Senate. Okay, so now let's talk about the House. On the House side, it's a totally different story. You start off with a baseline of historical precedent. You can go all the way back to World War II. And only 2 instances since then has a president's party gained seats during the off-election year, and those were anomalies. 2002, George W. Bush picked up some seats. That's because his popularity was at over 60% following September 11, 2001 attacks. People were rallying around the flag. And then you'd have to go back to, I think it was 98, where Clinton was going through the Monica Lewinsky affair, and it became highly partisan. And since then, even that, I wouldn't even look at that as a good example, because since then we've had redistricting that has significantly favored Republicans. And then if you look at it in even a macro sense, any president that has had a popularity of like 45% or as low as 40%, which is Biden's territory, it's not only a loss of seat for that party, but it's significant. I think Barack Obama lost 45 seats, and his popularity at the time was around 45%. And right now, Biden is at 40 to 43%. So the headwinds looking onto the House side say, there's no way we're going to regain the majority. There's only a 4-seat, 12? Yeah, 4-seat difference in the House. So right now, the general consensus is that Democrats are, I'd say, even odds in the Senate to maintain the majority. I might give them a slight edge of a few points. On the House side, given historical conditions, given Biden's popularity, it just seems like a huge mountain to overcome. Now, having said all of that, anyone that's going to prognosticate with absolute certainty on either the House side or the Senate side, even based on historical conditions, is nuts. Because everything that has been happening here in the U.S. lately is crazy, and is throwing sort of mechanisms into the engine that could just blow things up, and in a positive way potentially. 1 month ago, I would say that both the Senate and the House are probably going to be gone. We're fighting Democrats in part because of Biden, and in large part because of the economy writ large and what's happening internationally. They're just setting things up in such a poor way for Democrats that it would be impossible to overcome. The Democrats weren't accomplishing anything on their agenda. Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Sinema were, basically creating a roadblock for any progress or anything getting passed with anything meaningful. The war in Ukraine has increased prices on gasoline here immensely, and then inflation has been rising. But in the last month, what are we seeing? We're seeing all of a sudden Manchin and Sinema have changed. They've helped given the Biden administration some legislative victories. The former Build Back Better has now been pared down and has been called the Inflation Reduction Act. Within that, there are many positive things that the Democrats can go out and actually campaign on that are issues, pocketbook issues, and they can show that they're actually making progress, and contrast that with the Republicans, who are still focused on saying that the elections weren't real or weren't truthful in their results, and they can complain that the Department of Justice is unfairly targeting Donald Trump, and they're all going to get distracted. So, and then gasoline is now ebbing, which is helping down here. It just recently went underneath $4. And inflation has started to turn. We're getting reports now that in June it just started to turn the corner. So a month is a lifetime in politics, and we're only in August. So if the economy continues to improve and Democrats can get out there and start talking about their agenda in a positive way, I I don't think it's possible for us to keep the House, but we might stem the losses at least, and it will help us for the future.
So who are going to be the key Democrats that are going to be out there? Is the president going to be campaigning actively? Does he have enough coattails to help pull some Democratic candidates across the finish line? Or is it going to require some other people? Is Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi? Are they going to be out there stumping? Are they going to be able to help Democratic candidates? Who in the Democratic side of the ledger is going to be able to help bring candidates across the finish line?
I think this year, as in past cycles, how you use presidents and other prominent sort of Democratic or Republican leaders for that is done more in a tactical way. Biden might be used in GOTV efforts in the last week in areas where having him come and visit might help boost turnout. He'll also be used, hopefully, to help raise some money for some of these candidates and draw attention to them. There are very few districts, I surmise, outside of California and New York where you're going to want Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer coming in for a huge publicity tour, but you might have them in to do a quiet fundraiser among Democratic prominent fundraisers where it might make a difference. So they'll be tactically used, but I wouldn't see them doing a barnstorm tour. The Pelosi, Schumer, and Biden tour is unlikely to happen.
Let's talk about something that's been a trend in American politics for a number of years, and that is dark money and third-party money that's gone into campaigns. We've seen tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in third-party advertising to take down the president or to promote right-wing causes. How do you think that's going to impact in this election?
Well, I think what we're seeing is more of the same, honestly, now that this has all become, the rules of the road. It's not an anomaly anymore or a new sort of sensation sweeping politics. It's pretty common now. It's happening on both sides, and it's something that campaigns are more attuned with now. We're always tracking what's being spent on the outside. If you're a campaign, you're always tracking what's happening on the outside of your control. As a result, there is record spending, at least on television that I track closely, and digital in some of these races. And I think we're already on course for this off year to have record spending down here on these sorts of things. With outside groups and campaigns, it's always sort of the law of surprises and unintended consequences. You don't know what these outside groups are going to do, and they can both hurt you and help you. They can theoretically be there to help you, but still end up hurting you anyway. So they will continue to have an influence and can help set the agenda both in a good way and a bad way in some of these races.
I want to just shift slightly to talk about the January 6th hearings and what impact those are going to have in the midterm. Do you see anything significant coming out of that? Obviously, one of the things that we're going to be watching is what's happening in Wyoming, where the current vice chair of the committee is up for re-election, and she's going to be facing a tough Republican challenger in the primaries, and most likely people are saying that she's not going to win.
Yeah, the impact on the midterms, I think the average voter down here is more focused on the economy and what's happening with their own pocketbook and what the gas prices are than they are on some of those things. Liz Cheney, who used to be sort of one of the Darth Vaders of Democrats in Democrats' eyes, is suddenly the more moderate voice and somewhat a hero. So I would say the January 6th committee is part of the noise, just politically speaking, not literally speaking. They're part of the noise on the Republican sides that might help Republicans to raise money, might help Democrats to raise money, might impact or be used as a tool in terms of using them for turnout. But what's happening with the January 6th committee, really goes beyond politics. It's a matter of history. It's a matter of making sure that everything that happened on that day comes out into light and is documented for history, so we all know what's going on. So I think it's probably going to be a wash in terms of its political impact on the election, but I think it is important historically.
So besides Liz Cheney in Wyoming, what other ridings or what other districts should we be keeping an eye on in terms of how things are playing out? You mentioned earlier Pennsylvania, with Oz in Pennsylvania and a couple of others. So what are your ones?
Let's start on the House side. There's here in the U.S., every 2 years, all 435 seats are up for election. But the reality is, in this election, there's probably 20 to 30 different House districts that are potentially, in play, and then there's probably another 10 to 15 more that are on the fringe and can go. It depends on turnout and what happens in the final weeks. So what you're really focusing in on, if you want to go down to a granular level on a seat by seat, is over on the Senate side. And there you're talking states like Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Arizona, which is incumbent Mark Kelly, Wisconsin, and Mark Kelly is a Democrat, sorry. Wisconsin, right. Republican Ron Johnson. Democrats feel like they have a chance to take him out, and he's vulnerable. Ohio is in play. And then, of course, Georgia with Senator Raphael Warnock being challenged by Herschel Walker. Right. So those are sort of the biggies. Yeah. Republicans have long had an advantage on the state legislative level, where a lot of these states determine their boundaries for redistricting. There are some states that have already shifted to, are starting to shift to a more independent approach to establishing congressional lines and state legislative lines. So yes, the statewide races are important. Democrats seem to be doing pretty well on the governorship level, at least right now, because of a similar effect of Republicans in the Trump effect of nominating the more extreme people. Pennsylvania, again, is another key state that I happen to be focused on more than some of the others. In that state, there's a huge Trump guy named Mastriano who I believe was at January 6th, at the Capitol of January 6th, or at least in D.C. during January 6th. And he's running against the state's attorney general nominee, which is Josh Shapiro. And Democrats have a lead in that race right now, probably because Republicans nominated Mastriano. And that is a good example of a state where the Democratic campaign, Josh Shapiro's campaign, spent money trying to help Mastriano get elected on the Republican primary, so that could be the candidate he's faced. So that's another good example of Democrats actually picking what they wished for. So hopefully they'll be able to actually achieve a win based on what they've done, or in part on what they've done. So I haven't gone down to the granular level on the state legislative races in each of these states, but there are several states that are huge and probably correlate with some of these swing districts. Like in Pennsylvania, I think House Democrats on the state legislative level will have a 12-seat majority, but they got redistricted years ago and are wildly benefited Republicans in Pennsylvania. So it's hard to win back these seats, and that phenomena is happening in a lot of these different sort of battleground states.
Well, I think one of the states also that people are watching is what's happening with Texas with Beto O'Rourke.
Redistricting down in Texas and the southern states, especially when they did redistricting, it was done to bolster Republicans. in their chances and to keep seats in the House, in the federal House, the U.S. House of Representatives, and down there. Democrats had thought that they were going to offset some of the seats that Republicans were picking up through this redistricting game down there in New York, believe it or not. And the lines in New York, I believe, last I heard, were rejected and now have to be redone again more independently, which means that Republicans are going to be able to lock in some seat gains they're making down south, and Democrats are unable to make up for it up in New York. And going back 10 years now, the Republicans have been very obvious in their efforts to lock down redistricting down in the South to make sure they always have, at least over 150 congressional seats, probably unwinnable by Democrats throughout the South. So they have a block of support down there that can't be penetrated, which means now you have to go elsewhere to try to win a majority. And then, you've got swing districts that were swing districts that, might be trending in the wrong direction for Democrats if Latino voters, for example, start to creep towards more Republican support than they have in years past. And we've started to sort of see the sand start to move in that direction a little bit. So it's another.
Well, we saw that in Florida with Trump winning over Latinos over Biden.
Yeah, yes. Although it's also important to caution that not all Latino voters are the same, and Latino voters in Florida are a lot different than in other states. And you also have, Cuban people down in southern portion of Florida. That's a whole nother ball of wax down there. So you have to be a little bit careful and segregate out these Latino voters. They're not all Latinos are alike. Democrats need to. That's actually an important point for Democrats. Democrats have treated Latino voters very similar for a long time, and they need to be a little bit more. They need to do a better job on their messaging to Latino voters, and not just treat them as a monolithic bloc that doesn't care about things that everyone else cares about, like the economy and gas prices, for example.
Right. But American politics is truly fascinating, and love to have you back in another podcast to update us and share with us your points of view. For now, I'd like to thank you for joining us. It's Bud Jackson, founder of Jackson Group Media. Look forward to having you back again.
Thanks. Take care.